Well, it's a great pleasure. I get to introduce a lady that I found as we were looking for the topic of civility, right? If you want to search civility, right, the first name that's going to pop up is a lady named Alexandra Hudson. She's got an incredible website and ministry where she deals with civility, but she's also got a book, which is kind of cool, that's coming out that's specifically about this. It's called Against Politeness, Why Politeness Failed America and How Civility Can Save It, right? So if she can't hit our topic today, no one can. She's got her master's degree of public policy from the London School of Economics. She and her husband live in Indianapolis, Indiana. Please welcome Alexandra Hudson.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? It's wonderful to be with you all. I'm so grateful to be part of the Biblical Worldview Institute annual conference. So thank you so much for having me. And thanks, Dan, for the invitation and the warm introduction. As Dan mentioned, my name is Alexandra Hudson. I am from Los Angeles originally, but raised in Vancouver, Canada. And I now live in Indianapolis, Indiana, with my husband, Kyan, our 19-month-old son, Percival, and we're welcoming a baby girl into the world next month. December 25th, actually, is her due date. So hoping that, thank you, hoping that she arrives a little early or a little late. It would be maybe bad form for her to upstage Christ's birthday as her first kind of grand act in the world. But we're very, very grateful. And so I thought today we'd talk a little bit. I'd share with you my story and how I came to the work that I do on civility and exploring the difference between civility and politeness. And then I thought we'd reflect on the importance of what the education that each of you are getting, both here at this conference this week, but also in your classrooms, and how important that is to the solution to the civility problems that we have in our world today. And lastly, I want to talk with you about the importance of each of the efficacy that you each have to be a part of the solution and in transforming our culture for the better and to lead personally fulfilling lives as well for God's glory. So that's what I thought we'd do this morning. So a bit about my story. My mother, if you can believe it, is the manners lady. I'm not kidding you. She, my entire life, traveled across the US, Canada, and the entire world, teaching etiquette and manners to everything from big customer service companies for Fortune 500 companies to individuals and parents and their children who wanted to just burnish their social skills. And she also, in addition to focusing on the form of manners, she also embodied what I came to understand is true civility, just true graciousness and kindness and benevolence and hospitality, welcoming to others. But she did also teach etiquette and manners. And I remember growing up, so I was raised in this environment that was very attuned to social expectations and social norms. And I remember always kind of questioning them at the back of my head, wondering, Mom, why do we set the table just so? Why do we use forks and not chopsticks? Why do we have these norms and expectations? Have you guys ever had these questions before about why we do things the way we do them, why we have certain customs and expectations and mores? And my mother's answers to me were largely along the lines of, this is just the way we've always done it. And that never really satisfied me. I always kind of had these questions at the back of my head. But despite having these questions, I largely followed what I call the rules, these expectations and norms of politeness and courtesy. And for the most part, the rules served me fairly well. They helped me succeed in school, have relationships with friends and professors, and even in the workplace as well. And so despite questioning the rules, they did serve me well. That is, until I got to the U.S. Department of Education. I was so thrilled to have been offered a role with Secretary DeVos at the US Department of Education just after Donald Trump was elected. And it was, for me, it was the career break of a lifetime. I'm passionate about education and learning and curiosity. In addition to being the manners lady, both my mother and my father are both insatiably curious people, and they gave that gift to my brothers and I of just wonderment about the world around us, and a realization that education doesn't just happen in the classroom. It's a way of engaging in the world, and just what you bring to every interaction and every circumstance that you're in. And so I was thrilled for the chance of maybe having the opportunity to transform or change America's education system for the better, in just maybe even some small ways, in taking this role at the Department of Education. But I could not have been more disillusioned or disappointed with my time there. The most challenging part of my time in government was the fact that it was just the personal animosity and hostility and dehumanization that I both endured and observed during my time in government. For many people, they couldn't see past the fact that I was there because of who our president was, and that the fact that I was there because of Secretary DeVos. And in their mind, that justified them doing and saying very horrible things, chasing me down hallways, cursing at me in meetings, running me out of conference rooms, just things that I had never been exposed to in my life and wasn't prepared for. And I thought that I could overcome this hostility and animosity with politeness. Once I brought in cupcakes for a colleague's birthday, hoping that would win me some brownie points. And I invited them over to my home and out for coffee outside the office, hoping that that getting to know each other on a human, personal level could potentially help win them over and see that I was a human being just like them, and I didn't want to ruin America's education system like they thought I did. And it didn't work. It was a very frustrating experience. It didn't work. The rules of politeness that had kind of guided me and worked for me my entire life stopped working in this environment. And I was exposed to two extremes during my time in government. One was the radical hostility and animosity and ad hominem attack that we're very accustomed to in our public discourse today, the aggression, the angry kind of hostility. And the other extreme was the faux politeness, the saccharine, superficial niceness. And I saw people would be nice to my face or polite to other people's face, but then undermine me and others behind our back. And both of those extremes bothered me. And I identified them, I was frustrated by them, but I couldn't quite understand why that was. But I reflected on these two extremes, and I ended up leaving government after 1 year, deeply spiritually and emotionally, intellectually broken and fractured, just despondent. And I re-immersed myself in scripture and in Aristotle and Plato and these thinkers and these texts and ideas that I had been nourished by my entire life. And after throwing myself into these books again and kind of healing from the inside out after a very trying experience, I was reminded of an essential truth that I think our culture has largely forgotten today. This essential truth is that every single person, without exception, has an irreducible dignity and worth by virtue of being created in God's image. We bear the divine imprint. We are the pinnacle of creation as human beings. And that means that we are each owed a bare minimum of respect and decency. We are both owed that and owe that to others by virtue of this divine imprint, by virtue of the imago Dei, the divine imprint that we each bear. And that means that we owe respect to people even when we don't like them and disagree with them. And there's just this bare minimum threshold that was largely of just decency and respect that was largely absent during my time in government. And I realized that was why I was so frustrated by these two extremes that I had seen in government, both the radical aggression and hostility on one hand, and the saccharine, the fake politeness on the other, that both disregarded the inherent dignity of the human person. They instrumentalized others. They used people as means to ends, to selfish ends, as opposed to seeing people as ends in and of themselves. And that wasn't good enough. And so I threw myself into this project of civility and working on civility and trying to revive what I came to understand as true civility, and trying to bring more clarity to this discussion. And I realized that there was actually a really important difference between civility and politeness. I think today we often conflate the two terms. People, whether they want more civility and politeness or less civility and politeness in our public life today, they often use these terms interchangeably. And I think it's really important to separate them and to think clearly about what each of them is, so that we can better understand what we want in our society, what we want more of, what we should aim for in our society. So the difference between civility and politeness, I came to understand. So politeness is a technique. It is manners. It is the action, the outer conduct. And the etymology, the origin of the word politeness actually supports this difference. The Latin root of politeness is the word polliere, which means to smooth or to polish, and that is what politeness does. It polishes over our differences and our disagreements, and it kind of tries to diminish differences as opposed to giving us tools to grapple with them head on. But again, that etymology gets at the reality that politeness focuses on the superficial, the external primarily. Civility, by contrast, is a disposition. It's not just the act itself, it's the motivation behind the act, behind what we do and what we say. And again, it's grounded in imago Dei, it's grounded in human dignity, it's the disposition that sees others, and it's a way of approaching others in the world that sees people as inherently worthy of respect and as inherently just like us, with our shared personhood and the shared dignity that we have with having the imprint of the divine. And as a result of that, though, civility and the etymology of civility supports this as well. The Latin root of the word civility is civis or civitas, which relates to the city or citizenship. And that is what the disposition of civility equips us to do, to be members of the civis, to be members of the city, and to equip us with the disposition of citizenship, of engaging as members of a human community. And sometimes truly respecting others, respecting the dignity of the other. The duties of citizenship require that we be a little bit impolite, maybe, because that's what truly respecting people is. Like telling someone a hard truth is often in love is often the respectful thing to do, and not diminishing our difference or sweeping it under the rug or patronizing someone and telling them but disagreeing with them can often be a sign of respect, that I respect you enough to take you and your ideas seriously, and here's why I actually think you're wrong, and having a respectful discussion as a result of that. It's wonderful to look at examples throughout history, and we can to see people who were maybe civil and not polite. And I think Christ is a great example of that as well. In many instances, Christ was not always polite, but he was always deeply civil, because everything he did was in love and respect towards others. But Christ was hated during his day because he broke the rules of politeness. He broke the ritual laws and didn't blindly comply with the standards of norms and propriety of his day, which is why the Pharisees hated him. They were threatened by him. The Pharisees accused Christ of breaking the law on the Sabbath when he healed a man's withered hand. And he said to them, I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do evil or to save a life, and or to destroy it? What's interesting is the rules are easy. It's easy to just memorize a set of rules of politeness. They avoid the hard work of changing our hearts and having a disposition of actually respecting and caring for others. As the Pharisees exemplify, if we're creative, we can normally figure out how to achieve our selfish ends and disrespect people in the process while still outwardly complying with the rules and social expectations of our world, which is why remembering that the disposition of civility, of actually respecting others, is far more important than the outward actions alone. Sometimes our love for others and truly respecting others will require, again, putting aside the rules. Christ, again, was not one to mince words when it came to calling people out for their hypocrisy. He spoke truth to power, and he exposed the idolatry and pretense of those around him in his day. For example, he said, to the Pharisees, "You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good?" That doesn't quite seem like polite dinner party speech, does it? But it's truth-telling, and that's actually a means of respecting those around you. Instead of coddling them and their misguided beliefs, Christ exposed the selfishness and sin that actually harmed the Pharisees in the long run. Time and time again, Christ's example reminds us that a person's disposition of the heart matters far more than blind compliance with the rules of politeness alone. He reminds us that it's better to actually be good than to merely appear to be good, which is what the rules of politeness tend to focus on, the appearance of goodness. It's easy to forget today that robust debate and disagreement is actually a good thing. Not only is it essential to the health of our free society and our democracy, but again, it's actually a sign of truly caring for and respecting someone else. As many of you go back to your classrooms later this week, and even onto college campuses next year, I encourage you to keep that in mind, that remembering that sometimes speaking the truth, even when it might be controversial, and candid conversation is more important and more respectful than diminishing and polishing over our differences. Our issue with civility today is not a new problem. It's not a now problem. It's not an America problem. It's not a problem that this party or that party has. This is actually a human problem. It's a problem that has faced every single individual in human society across time and across place because because we have two core facets to our human nature. On one hand, we are deeply social. We know that we flourish. We know that we become fully human in community with others. And that is why across history and across culture, people have come together to collaborate and to build societies and build structures and institutions because we know that we're able to achieve more together than in isolation, and that we are happier, we're more fulfilled in community and in relationship with others. As God said after he created Adam, it is not good for man to be alone. We know that we flourish, we thrive, we realize the fullness of our humanity in community and relationship. However, we are also deeply sinful and selfish as human beings. We are both biologically and morally driven to meet our own needs before those of others. And that means, and those two things are in tension. Our deeply social impulses and desires are in tension with our desire to meet our needs before those of others. And that tension has been present in every human arrangement across history and across culture. And civility is the process by which, in ways big and small, we subjugate the ego and we surrender our selfish desires for the sake of relationship, for the sake of community, and so that we can become fully human in relationship with others. Because this is not a new problem or a now problem, when we look at texts across history that are about civility or about etiquette or just about getting along, we see a remarkable continuity in the kind of advice that people offer in terms of how to do this thing called life and community together. For example, the oldest book in the world It's called the Maxims of Tatotep, and it dates back to 2300 before Christ. The oldest book in the world is a civility manual. It's a self-help manual to help people get along and do community together. It was written for, Tatotep was a vizier. He was an Egyptian vizier, so an advisor to the pharaoh. And in his 37 maxims, it's remarkable how many of them are applicable today and also resonant with many of the kind of adages from Proverbs, or just kind of the timeless print. Like it's something that maybe Ben Franklin could have written, just like really, really practical and with remarkable continuity. For example, Tatotep writes, "Do not be proud and arrogant with your knowledge," the maxims begin. This addresses a timeless challenge that people have. They want to show off, and we tend to think ourselves better than others, which is a manifestation of our selfishness. The second maxim says, "If you meet a disputant in the heart of action, pay no attention to his evil speech. If you do not confront him while he is raging, people will call him an ignoramus. Your self-control will be a match for his evil utterances." So again, getting to this idea of self-restraint, of curbing our selfish impulse for the sake of community. And again, this is something that a recurring theme in the book of Proverbs, the wisdom literature of the Hebrew Bible. It's very similar to the proverb, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger." Tatotep goes on. He says, "Be good to those in need. Don't gossip." It's remarkable how the continuity, again, in prohibition against gossip that we find in these texts and these etiquette manuals across history and across culture. In fact, in the Hebrew Bible, gossip is often analogized to leprosy, because that's exactly what leprosy does to the body, in the way that it corrodes the flesh. That is what gossip does to community and also to individual human souls. When we talk ill of others behind their back, again, when we're nice to people's face, but when we speak ill of them behind their back, that is the enemy, that is the death, that is corrosive to human flourishing and to community. And it's remarkable that we find such similarity in texts from different cultures and authors that didn't know about each other. They were completely independent of each other. And it's that they happen to come to the same conclusions about the best way to live well together in society, independently of one another. This is a wonderful reminder that all truth is God's truth, and that we can appreciate God's truth through a variety of different sources, even non-Christian sources, as many church fathers and thoughtful Christ followers have done before us. So again, civility, our challenge with civility today, it's not a new problem, not a now problem, not an America problem, it's a human problem. And looking to history, looking to specifically American history, it can be both a caution and a comfort to us today. It can be a comfort to us because we think it's bad today. There are problems with civility, our lack of civility between our public leaders or fellow citizens. It's been worse. For example, there's a famous story about the caning of Charles Sumner. Has anyone heard of this story before? Raise your hand if you've heard of it. This story is really evocative and powerful. It was kind of right before the Civil War, and there was a big debate waging in America, and especially in Congress, about slavery. And Sumner was adamantly opposed to slavery, and some of the best rhetoric about from the abolitionist position is from Charles Sumner's accounts and the speeches he wrote and read publicly on the floors of Congress. And he was absolutely critical of the slave owner. And what he said of the slave owners in the South was that they were fundamentally unfit for self-governance in a republic, because the way that slave owners subjugated another human being and treated slaves, that of course hurt slaves, but it also corroded and corrupted the soul of the slave owner as well. And that's a really important thing for us to think about today. When we exercise power, when we're cruel and unkind to others in our own lives, It's easy to see how that hurts others, but what we might miss is the way that that corrodes and corrupts our own hearts and souls as well. And so Sumner would get up on the floors of Congress, and he was a senator, and he would, berate and criticize and chastise the corrupted soul of the slave owner. And he had particularly insulted the relative of a congressman named Preston Brooks. And one day, Preston Brooks came from Congress. Again, there were two separate chambers in Congress, right? So he came. It wasn't really done, but he came to the hall of the Senate, the chamber of the Senate, and he approached Sumner from behind with a cane, and he beat him, and he beat him, and he beat him within an inch of his life. Sumner actually had to take 2 years to recover after his horrible beating on the floor. This is in Congress. This is in our highest level of government. And it's worth noting how Preston Brooks decided to attack Charles Sumner. In the sort of genteel South, how do you think gentlemen, between like a debate between equals, might have settled a dispute like this? If their honor was insulted, of course, Preston Brooks was defending the honor of his family and a family member. Any ideas about how two gentlemen in the chivalrous South might have settled a dispute? Any ideas? Yes. Any ideas? Yes. A duel. Thank you. That's exactly right. A duel. Duels were outlawed. They were not allowed, but that's how gentlemen settled disputes. But this is not how Preston Brooks decided to settle this dispute. He approached Charles Sumner from behind and beat him like he would beat an animal or like he would beat a slave, because he did not think that Charles Sumner was his equal. And this was a common way of thinking in the slave-owning South, that African Americans were not equal, Northerners were not equal. They were lesser. They were lesser human beings. We were not fundamentally equal, which is antithetical to both the notion that we are created in God's image, and though we differ in how we look and our different talents and outcomes in life, that we are fundamentally equal in the way that matters most. That is a core tenet of our Christian faith, but it's also a core tenet of the American project, that all men are created equal and endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. And so Sumner was correct in assessing that sort of disposition that saw fellow human beings as fundamentally lesser than themselves was antithetical and a threat to the American Republican project of self-governance. So history is both a comfort and a caution, because it's bad now, but it's been bad before. And that is one example. We've fought a civil war. We've had people beaten within an inch of their lives multiple times, in fact, in the halls of Congress. But it's also comforting because we've come away from the precipice of, the brink of total civilizational collapse before. And even though it feels bad today, we can do that again. So history is a caution and comfort. I love the words of William Wilberforce, a devout Christian believer and instrumental in ending the slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade in England. And he said that the Lord God has put before me 2 tasks: the suppression of the slave trade and the reformation of manners. For Wilberforce, those 2 things were inextricably linked, because they were fundamentally about curbing the selfish impulse, the will to dominate and exert power over others, which is an expression of our fallen and selfish and sinful nature. Another Christian thinker that is particularly important to me in my life, St. Augustine, he had this thought too before Wilberforce. He lived during the end of the Roman Empire, kind of as the Roman Empire was falling. An incredibly important thinker in both Western philosophical history and especially Christian history. He saw a few main problems with human nature. He saw, again, as we've discussed, we are deeply sinful. And because of our sinful nature, we have something called, within each of us, the libido dominendi, the will to dominate others. And we also have within each of us the incurvatus in se, which is the inward curve towards the self that each of us innately have. And this inward curve towards the self it means that we love ourselves and we prioritize ourselves again over God and over others. It's that our heart's default is the exact opposite of Christ's dual commandment to us, to love God and love others first. And to counter these baser aspects of our nature requires a concerted effort. It takes effort every day in each of us, and it takes education, which we'll talk about in a second, to cultivate within us a love of God and a love of others, and to order our souls that allow us to love God first, others second, and ourselves last, and to counter, again, the default of our human soul. This is exactly why the education that each of you are getting at your respective schools, and especially here at the Biblical Worldview Institute Conference, is so important. It's preparing you to order your souls, to love things in their appropriate order, God first, others second, ourselves last, which is necessary to both mitigating our civility problem in our country today, but also to living lives well and to the fullest and in accordance with God's best for our lives. Again, Augustine called this ordering of the soul the ordo amore, and it was about ordering our souls to better love God and love others second. And I want to encourage each of you that it can feel really insurmountable, the challenges to civility and to flourishing and to our democracy today. It can feel, it's easy to go on Twitter or watch the news and feel like the challenges are way too big and our individual efforts are way too small, and we're not up for the task. We're not capable of mitigating the deep challenges to civility in our world today. But I want to encourage you, do not underestimate the power that you each have to be a part of the solution. We really like hero stories. We like Harry Potter, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We James Bond. We really like people that with supernatural strength or superhuman strength, they're able to save the world and do incredible things. But we often underestimate that the greatest acts of heroism are often in our everyday and in our decision to treat our fellow students, our fellow citizens, and our fellow persons with the decency and dignity that they deserve by being created in God's image, by having the imprint of the divine, the imago Dei, and the irreducible worth that they have in light of that. So I encourage each of you, as you go back to your classrooms, as you walk onto college campuses next year, don't underestimate your own power to influence your immediate sphere of influence, or the way in which your decision to change your life and elevate your conduct can have and influence those around you for the better as well. You can each lead by example, and in so doing, be an important part, an indispensable part of the solution. Each decision we make to interact with others is an important part of the solution. And this applies to how we interact in all forms of life and interaction, virtually in person as we go to college campuses next year, but also virtually as well. So much of our interaction today, both in the pandemic era, but also in the social media era, is virtually mediated, and it's so easy to forget that there's a person often on the other end of an interaction. And it's easy to depersonalize and dehumanize and to just let our rage or our frustration ventilate and dictate how we interact, but to strive to keep in mind the personhood and the dignity of the person on the other side of that interaction. That is one example of living out a life of civility, of the ordo amore today. It informs how we treat others to their face, and also how we treat them when we're not with them. Again, like back to this idea of gossip being corrosive to community. It's so easy to fall into a temptation to speak ill of people that are not present with us because it makes us feel better. It feeds our pride. It makes us feel superior, and makes us feel okay in comparison to others. But to be content in the fact that we bear, again, the imprint of the divine, and we are infinitely valuable because of that. We're okay. We don't need to justify our existence by comparing ourselves to others and making ourselves feel better in comparison to others. When we meet others, let's choose to assess them based on their civility, on their true inner kindness, and not according to measures of politeness or taste, such as how they dress or how they talk or how they think, whether they have the same opinions as us. It's very easy to confuse matters of taste and politeness with to infuse those kind of things with a moral valence, a moral significance, and it's easy for us to think that people who are like us, who dress like us, who talk like us, that they're better and more valuable than those that do not. That's just a manifestation of our selfish nature. But to pray that, to assume God's view of the world and others, and see, again, the imprint of the divine, the dignity of the other, to see through the appearances, the superficial things. Samuel says that man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, that we can take that disposition as well and try and see that in others and appreciate that, the inner goodness in others, and look past the superficial things in life. Being part of a more civil future, choosing to be part of a more civil future means taking a welcoming, inclusive disposition and seeking to make the outsider, transform the outsider in our social spheres, make them the insider, make them feel welcome, make the person who is different or new, make them feel like they are part of the fold, part of the community, and seeking to serve those around us before we are served. The word civility, as we talked about, is related etymologically to the word civis, or political community, and also civitas, or citizenship. And this concept of the civis is linked etymologically to the notion of civilization. And this is because, again, civilization is built in community, and it is built and supported by civility, again, this disposition of treating others with decency and respect that they are entitled to by virtue of their dignity and our shared humanity. This concept of civilization is linked conceptually to the notion of culture. Why? Because we must cultivate the disposition of civility. It takes concerted effort, both externally, like in your classrooms and the education you receive, that is a form of cultivating you. But it also requires self-cultivation and a concerted effort from each of us in our everyday. What we learn from history is that civilization and culture is precarious. It is not a foregone conclusion. It requires a concerted effort to cultivate and keep and to sustain that if enough people decide that they don't want to be a part of this project of human community and civilization, it can disintegrate and deteriorate very rapidly. And so again, going back to your classrooms and going onto college campuses next year, appreciating that you are being prepared to be a part of the solution by each deciding to be tools of cultural healing in our world today, that your individual decisions and how you choose to respect one another is a part of sustaining this big macro project of civility, that without them, the future can be really bleak. John Donne, one of my favorite English poets, wrote that no man is an island. Again, we live in society, we live in community together, and that when it comes to community, he writes, "Do not wait to ask for whom the bell tolls. it tolls for thee. I'm hopeful for the future of our nation because I have hope for each of you, smart and dedicated with a heart for Christ, that each of you can make changes in your own lives. And as a result of that, changing your inner disposition, cultivating an inner disposition of civility, having remarkable influence in your respective spheres in your life to change the direction of our nation for the better. So thank you to each of that. Thanks to each of you for that hope, and thank you for very much for having me today.